Okay, hello, I am Tony Jackson. My speech is on Abraham Lincoln. Well, first of all, Abraham Lincoln was the 16th President of the United States. He faced a lot of controversies from everywhere from his childhood all the way through um, his early marriages and then his presidency. Um, some of the questions that people always ask is, where did he come from? What did he believe in? Why did he become president? And well, how did he die eventually? So, Abraham Lincoln was born on February 12th, 1809. He was born to some poor, uneducated farmers and a one-room log cabin. He was born in Kentucky, and in Kentucky he was outside the 13 territories that were surveyed by the U.S. government. And so during that time period, because he had his property in this farm, this log cabin in Kentucky, they actually had to move because the government reclaimed the land. It wasn't properly surveyed. So as the government was going through America and taking land back, his family had no way of proving that they were actually owners of the property that they had lived on. So even at an early age, about the age of 17, they were kicked out of his property. Lost his home, his parents had to relocate, so they moved to Indiana from there. It's a good prelude into who Abraham Lincoln was as a president. A lot of his presidency was to defend republicanism. Republicanism was free land, free soil, and free work, free labor. Kind of the ethic of a free market. How can we actually pay people and give people the land that they earn, basically? Something that the government can't take away from you. Something that your neighbor can't take away from you. So he really stood for republicanism, this ideal government. At the time, there was no republicanism. It was called the Whig Party. The Whig Party was a slight shadow of republicanism. So, from his early childhood, being born into poor, uneducated farming family, losing their property at the age of 17, they move on. He eventually served as a lawyer. He entered into debates about injustice of slavery. He called it a monstrous institution. He continued to debate slavery from 1854 to 1858. Before he became a lawyer, and before he started debates about the injustice of slavery, he found himself through a lot of really bad situations. He had tried to start many small businesses, never worked out. He had tried to join the military. They actually made him a captain of a militia that never actually saw combat. So he just sat on his laurels. And so even when he was a captain of a militia, he said that was the best experience of his entire life. But he never did anything. He just sat around with a bunch of militiamen in Indiana. So it's really quite interesting. And so in the speech at Peoria on October 16th, 1854, he had called slavery a monstrous institution, condemning it because it went against his Republican beliefs. His beliefs of free land, free soil, free market. Slavery was contrary to the idea of freedom, to the idea of liberty. So it went against everything that he had actually stood for. Not only did he stand against slavery, he also stood for constitutional rights as a Republican. According to a chronology of Abraham Lincoln's life, he had a debate with a guy named Douglas, and he had warned that the slave power was threatening the values of republicanism. Slave power was the power that democratic South people had. They had an economic that flowed in through slavery, wealth that poured in that the North didn't have at all. Abraham Lincoln was opposed to slavery, not only because it was unjust, but also because his counterparts, the Democrats, who wanted to control the nation as well, had much more wealth coming in and used slaves to gain that wealth. And so he's adamant against both the Democratic Party and against slavery, mainly so we can see this idea of freedom come about at that time period. He had an unsuccessful early political campaign with the Illinois General Assembly. Abraham Lincoln tried and failed a lot of different ventures. After becoming president in 1860, Lincoln worked vigorously to maintain a Republican nation. Um, it found its authority in the morals of the Declaration of Independence. Up until that time, it was the Constitution of the United States, and most politicians were finding their authority and their power in. He took the opposite approach. He said, let's look at the Declaration of Independence, and let's personalize these values for each of us. So instead of looking at the broad Constitution, let's look at these values of independence. He was the first person to take the theoretical into a practical level, take it from a broad political concept into a personal way of life, and say, no, we're going to stand up for something, we're going to stand up for values and justice. During the American Civil War, Lincoln took a lot of power into his own hands. He had imprisoned over 18,000 Confederate troops without trial. These were Southern troops that were marching against the North, Southern troops that had the power of slavery and the money and the wealth of slavery, that were marching against this new Republican Party. And as being president, Lincoln took a lot of power into his own hands. And he said, no, you don't get a trial. You're going straight to the slammer. This was seen as an abuse of power, and no other president has ever used this amount of power before. So because of that, a lot of Confederates were really rising up against him. A lot of assassination attempts, a lot of conspiracy attempts to overthrow this new Republican Party, to replace it with a Democratic Party run by the South, run by the financiers of slavery. And so you get into the picture of John Wilkes Booth, well-known actor and a Confederate spy from Maryland. Him and a couple other folks got together, and they basically plotted an attempt to actually kidnap. Lincoln was the first to go about. In an attempt to do that, John Wilkes Booth actually snuck up behind Lincoln and shot him in the middle of the play, assassinated him. So the purpose of this speech is just to talk about one aspect of Abraham Lincoln. I'm sure there's lots of aspects about Abraham Lincoln, but I thought it was really interesting, his pursuits in freedom, in anti-slavery, and how he was able to combine those worlds together, how they weren't separated from one another. I thought it was very interesting. And in the end, I think Abraham Lincoln stood for a lot of things, but the question I always ask is, was he just anti-slavery, or was he a very determined Republican that wanted to change the face of the United States, or was he both? Either way, it seems like he had changed the face of the United States, and from that day on, I don't think people view politics or slavery the same because of Abraham Lincoln. That's it.